Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest?
So, they're all busy, Bramante and Michelangelo, but Julius the second had other things going on too, right? One of the things he needed cash, he had a cash flow problem, right? Because he needed to fill up the coffers again. All the money was gone. And one of the things the Borgias did, right, was to set his nephews, right, um, into positions of power all over Europe, right? So the Borgia, which is a Spanish dynasty, right, had a lot of Italy and a lot of the Papal States, which was the worldly part of the Papal Kingdom, were controlled by the Borgia, right? And Venice was like coming in and taking more of the Papal States, and it was he was losing cash flow problems, right, by all these aristocrats taking over papal land. So he should go, fine, he's a pope, he's supposed to be peaceful, make deals, or come to some type of compromise. But no, he goes to war, right? One of the things he did, he was supposed to, when he became pope, he says, one of the things you got to do, you got to sign here, you got to go on crusade against the Muslims, right? Because that's what we do as Catholics, we fight Muslims, right? And they fight us, we fight them. It's just, cat and mouse for thousands of years. It's still going on today. So, but he doesn't do that, right? What he does, he goes on a crusade, but not against the Muslims. He goes on the crusade against the Borgia in the Papal States, right? And against the Venetians, right? So that's why they call him the warrior pope. He actually straps on silver armor, gets on a white stallion, right? Gets his sword and goes on a crusade against his own Papal States to get them back under control, and the Venetians, right? And what's kind of funny, right? He takes all the popes, he takes all the cardinals with him, right? The cardinals are a bunch of old guys, right, in red robes, right? He makes them get on their red robes, get on horses, and follow him into battle. And they're like, sometimes they have to go over these mountains, and they're all complaining, like, it's wet, I want to go back to my palace. And so Julius comes over and hits him on the side of the head with the flat of his sword and says, well, we got to go conquer, we got to conquer Italy for God, right? So he does. He goes there, and he actually, but he can't do it. He has to actually ask the French to come into Italy to kick out the Spanish, right, and the Venetians, who are their own little kingdom. And initially he wins, right? He gets Borgia back, and then Borgia, he gets Borgia, and he says, to celebrate his victory, and he brings Michelangelo along with him, right? Just sort of planned military action is going on. And of course, Michelangelo's going, I'm not a military expert, I'm a sculptor, right? But he goes along. And then after they win, he tells Michelangelo to build him this giant bronze of himself, of Pope Julius II, conquering Borgia, right? With the sword, right? And again, Michelangelo says, well, I don't work in bronze, I work in, marble, right? He says, it's art, art is art, just do it. So he does, he makes a bronze, and it's this big bronze statue of Julius outside Borgia, unfortunately, the Venetians and the Borgia come back, and they reconquer Borgia, and so the Pope and his cardinals with Michelangelo, have to run away, right? They're running back to Rome, right? And the Borgias, the Venetians, quickly melt down this bronze statue, turn it into a cannon, right? And they called it Giulietta, after Julius, little Juliet, right? And then they're like throwing like these bronze these bronze cannonballs after Pope Julius as he's running away. So that's when he has to go get the French to come in and help him, conquer the Venetians. But then it turns out inviting the French in is never a good idea because they're not going to go away, right? They come in and they stay, right? So he has to get like the Venetians, believe it or not, to help him fight the French, right? So during this whole thing, he goes after campaign after campaign after campaign. He's having military campaigns all all over Europe, right? You know, and sometimes he's successful, sometimes he's not. And again, you get a sense of that when you watch the Agony and the Ecstasy, right? It's you know, and when you're having all these campaigns, right? It takes money, and Michelangelo isn't getting paid, right? Bramante isn't getting paid. You know, things slow down. So they come back. At one point, they bring Michelangelo back. He says, "Okay, start working on the tomb because we need to get it. I'm, you know, getting up in age. I want this before I'm dying." Michelangelo's going, "You're not going to have it before you're dead because it's going to take me 40 years if that's all I was doing, and you keep distracting me." So, but then Bramante, you know, says, you know, shouldn't be working on this tomb, right? Because that's bad luck to making tombs while you're still alive. He says, what you should do is you should go paint the Sistine Chapel, which is just like a barn by the side of the, you know, the Vatican Palace. It's like where the Pope has church, but it's, you know, it's painted on the sides by some great artists, but it's very tall and very airy, and there's not a lot of architecture. It's like a barn with the walls painted. He says, well, why don't you just have Michelangelo go paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, right? That will keep him busy for a while, because Bramante sees Michelangelo as a rival, right? They're both like architecture and, you know, and sculpture, you know, there was competition going on. So he says, we'll make Michelangelo go paint frescoes on a ceiling that are like 70 feet off the floor, right? So he goes, so Pope Julius goes, you know, forget the tomb for a while, go paint the ceiling on the Sistine Chapel. And Michelangelo goes, what? No, I'm not going to go paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It's 70 feet off the friggin' ground, right? You're crazy. So he runs away to Florence, and then the Pope has to go get him, and finally he sends troops. He arrests Michelangelo and brings him back and says, no, you gotta. So he finally drags Michelangelo into the Sistine Chapel, and Michelangelo's, and Bramante had set up all the scaffolding, right? So that, you know, all Michelangelo has to do is climb up there and like fresco the whole thing. And Michelangelo, forget it, I don't trust him. This is, if you want to get rid of Michelangelo, right, you build him scaffolding that's going to fall down. So Michelangelo made him remove all of Bramante's scaffolding, and Michelangelo built his own scaffolding. And again, Michelangelo had never done frescoes, right? He was never really painted, right? He's a sculptor. So it takes him 4 years to paint it. And if you look at the first half of the Sistine Chapel, they're kind of small, detailed, but you know, you can't see them from the floor, right? But you can see as it goes across the chapel, it gets better and better and better until you get to the end. And then at the center, you have the most famous one. But he was learning as he was going on, because remember, he had never done a fresco before, which is complicated. So that's, you know, what was going on. And he never really did get back to making the tomb while Julius was alive. And when first of all, when Julius died, none of the other popes have a lot of interest in Julius's tomb, right? It's like, whatever, you know, if you didn't build it while you're alive, it's not going to ever be built, and it never was. Also, what was going on? Raphael was actually painting the Sistine Chapel, not the Sistine Chapel, the papal rooms, right? The palace of where the poem was actually going to sleep and live, right? And the story interesting of that is, like, Raphael is really young, right, when he comes in, and the papal apartments were almost all completely painted by older, more, you know, sophisticated artists. But when the Pope, so this little Raphael comes in, and they says, like, this one little corner hadn't been painted. So I go, you go do that. So this is your entry into, you know, the art, right? But he paints this one little corner, and it's so magnificent. And the Pope sees it, Pope Julius, right? Again, over the top. He makes them take down against fresco. So they scrape off everybody else's paintings, right? That's been in the papal apartment that these people have been working on for 3 years. He has them chip it off, plaster it, and has Raphael Pope Julius says, Raphael, you do it. You do the whole thing because you're like way better than these other artists I had before. So Julius is doing the apartments when Michelangelo was doing the Sistine Chapel. So that's what was going on. And Raphael was a lot more sociable, a lot more young, right? A lot more beautiful, right? When he was painting the apartments, right? There was like people playing violin, and there's always food out. There is people coming talking about philosophy, and Raphael just loved it. He was like a social butterfly. But 15 feet away, you had like Michelangelo painting this chapel. He had it all covered. He wouldn't let anybody in. You couldn't see it. So, anyways, this is getting too long, so I'll probably end here. Julius finally does die. He never gets his tomb. There's a more diminished part of it where the Moses and Julius is never buried there. He gets just like a regular papal tomb like everybody else. But what was going to be his tomb gets like put into St. Peter in Chains. It's another church in Rome, so you can still see what maybe the front end of it would have looked like. It's no longer three-dimensional. It's just along a wall. But again, it's one of his great works. But Julius finally dies. He doesn't die in battle. He dies of old age, as you can see, worn out with time. And that's the picture at the end you see from Raphael, right? And there's a lot of if you look on YouTube or Google, just Google Pope Julius II, and that's the first picture that will come up, right? So you should look at that. I think it's in the National Gallery, so you could probably go see it without too much difficulty. And he did die. He did die, right? Of course, all popes die. This one died, right? He didn't get very far on the St. Peter's Basilica, right? They didn't even tear down the old one because people got too upset. So they were still using the old basilica, but he dug the foundation and put up the first 4 pillars that are going to hold it all. And turned out that Bramante was a great architect, right? What he designed was beautiful, right? It would have been great. It just wouldn't have worked. It would have all fell down on itself. But he was not an engineer. He was not a structural engineer. He was just looking at design, right? So what you find out later is that this building goes on. Michelangelo lives to be almost 90, right? So he lives through 9 popes, and we're going to go through most of them, right? But at the end of the day, as these popes go on, the design for the basilica changes and changes and changes. But Michelangelo, at the end, almost the end, goes back to Bramante. And even though they were rivals during that time, now Bramante's been long dead, Julius is long dead, but he respects Bramante as an artist and as an architect. So he goes back to Bramante's design, but he redesigns it so it's structurally sound and it's not going to fall down on itself once you put the dome on. And Michelangelo actually designs the dome, right, and re-centers it and makes it stronger. Got stronger pillars, add some support, and that's what we know today, basically. So it goes back basically to Bramante's design, but Michelangelo is not only a good architect, artist, sculpture, he's also turns out he's a good engineer and a good general contractor in getting all that going. So we'll probably stop here. I probably missed so much. Oh, one more thing is Julius, as remember, when the Borgia Pope died, the Vatican, the church was in debt, right? They owed everybody money. When Julius died, he had money in the coffers. He had money to go on paying Michelangelo for the next 40 years. So, because he thought, Michelangelo was going to go build his tomb, right? But they had money in excess when Julius died. So he was this warrior pope. He was over the top. He was an artist. He was a Protestant, but he had 3 daughters while he was in the Vatican. He wasn't he made no tense about being holy or being a spiritual leader. He was the general contractor for the church, right? Saints were somewhere else. He wasn't there to be a saint. He was there to unite the church militant, right, as a power on the earth. And he said, I have to drive all the barbarians out of Italy, right? And by the barbarians, right, not the Muslims, right? The crusade he had was to get the French, the Germans, the Spanish, everybody out of Italy and have it, the Papacy Italian, Italy for the Italians, right? And he never succeeded in that, but he did do power politics enough, right, so that indeed Rome had become the center of the Catholic world. And we'll see what happens after Julius with the Medici popes, Louis X and Clement VII, and the Pauline popes after that.
So thank you, Joseph, for that brief synopsis. So after Julius II and Bramante, there was the first Medici Pope, Pope Leo X. From 1513 to 1521, Leo X spent 8 years driving the Catholic Church off a cliff. Luckily for the church, he did die at the age of 45 of pneumonia. Now, Leo X, his birth father was Lorenzo de' Medici, but Leo only inherited his father's worst traits. Leo could not save money, and he was a bad administrator. Now, Leonardo had warned his second son that in Rome there was many temptations, and he should steer clear of all the bad vices that were everywhere in the Eternal City. Of course, Leo didn't listen to his dad and enjoyed all the excesses that he could absorb, and he absorbed a lot. Leo ended up loving anything that was odd, strange, or interesting, zoos and dwarfs. He was an entertainer who liked to be entertained. He also loved hunting, but by the time he became a pope, he was too fat to actually hunt. So he would wait, and they would try to herd a stag toward him. He also had an elephant that he would ride called Hanno the elephant. So he didn't work very hard. But one time while he was hunting, he did have to stop and take a break for some paperwork. He had to sign some paperwork to excommunicate Luther. Of course, then he just kept the indulgences rolling off the printing press. In terms of the construction of the Basilica, he really loved. Soon, Bramante was old, and he died pretty quick after Leo's took the reins. And then Leo appointed Raphael as the architect of St. Peter's, which was crazy because Raphael was a brilliant artist, and he painted the frescoes. He did such a good job that he got all the other artists fired. But he had never built anything, especially not a huge construction situation like St. Peter's Basilica. But anyway, what Raphael was actually just he was great at drawing. So he did end up being able to draw the plans, the architectural plans, and the way he did it, the three-dimensional plans are still in use today. So that was cool. But Raphael was, in my opinion, the preeminent artist of the Renaissance, and in my opinion, not to diss on any artists today, or people who love Van Gogh or Picasso, but in my opinion, art's gone downhill since Raphael. The stuff he painted, to me, is just too realistic. It's almost bordering on a little bit creepy because it looks like they're alive. So anyway, back to Leo. So Leo's had friends, he had enemies, and he had money problems. As Joseph discussed, Julius II left the church flush with money. And then Leo came along and he burned through that money so quick. It was like the Florentines burning through that guy that was before Martin Luther that they burned at the stake, Savonarola. That's how quick that Leo burned through the money. Okay. He did have a friend that he really liked. The guy's name was Chigi. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Chigi. Chigi. Not to be confused with the Chigi like 100 years later who became a pope. But this Chigi was the banker for the popes. And when Leo became pope, he was the banker, and they were buddies, and he gave advice and got money flowing. Chigi loved parties, and Leo loved to be entertained, so it was a match made in heaven. One time, Chigi was having a party at his house and they were using these golden plates. And after dinner, he says, you know what, let's save the servants some work, and we'll just throw these golden plates behind us into the river. So him and all the guests, they just threw these golden plates into the river. You know, and the rest of the night, that was the whole topic of the discussion. It's like, wow, I can't believe we just threw golden plates into a river. Of course, when everybody left, Chigi had the horses brought in, and they pulled the nets out of the river and recaptured all the plates. He liked to entertain, but he wasn't dumb. There was an enemy that Leo X had, and it goes back actually generations because he was a Della Roura, whatever, the Hatfields and McCoys, the Medicis and the Della Roura. There was assassination, and they never forgave each other. But anyway, so the guy who consecrated Leo X was actually from that opposing family, but he wasn't really involved in that assassination back then, and he was actually probably a really good guy, and he was always warning Leo that, you know, you're overspending, and Riario was the head of the Augustine monks, which Luther was a part of. So he's always warning them about Luther. You got to reform the church. You got to stop this spending, incessantly bothering Leo. And Leo's like, well, you know, that's just because our families hate each other. You know, I'm not going to listen to you. And he just kept on doing what he was doing, overspending and not paying attention to the corruption in the church. But in this situation, Leo turned it to his advantage because he uncovered an assassination plot on himself. This Riario guy was planning to assassinate him. So he had him arrested, and he confiscated all that guy's wealth. And he was one of the richest guys in the world. So there you go. He got some money to continue building the church. He also had another guy in his orbit that was just famous for making bad decisions, and his name was, I'm not sure, Pucci, P-U-C-C-I. He's just had some terrible ideas. He was in charge of the fiasco of Henry VIII's wife, where it caused the, Church of England to be created. And he was the guy behind the indulgences. So that guy was just terrible with ideas. When Leo died at the age of 45, kind of suddenly from pneumonia, Rome was frankly just tired of the extravagant spending, the unrestrained corruption, and they were just so sick of it that they ended up, the next pope was a Dutchman. He wasn't Italian, and his name was Adrian, and he was the no-nonsense Dutchman, and he didn't last very long, but during his time, construction on the Basilica stopped completely. So that was a short time, and then after that was Clement, which we'll talk about together with Joseph. So stay tuned, we're going to keep going.
Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest? Does history repeat itself? Not really. But sometimes it kind of rhymes.